Hello, and welcome back to the Outdoor Minimalist podcast. I'm your host, Meg Carney, and I'm an outdoor and environmental writer and author of the book, Outdoor Minimalist, Waste Less Hiking, Camping, and Backpacking. Follow the link in the description to pre-order a copy of the book so you'll be the first to receive it on the date of September 1st, 2022. The Outdoor Minimalist podcast has a goal to give listeners actionable ways to waste less hiking, camping, backpacking, and more during every step of their process. Your impact outdoors starts long before you hit the trail and goes beyond leave no trace ethics. You'll learn how to identify sustainable outdoor brands, how to ask hard questions regarding sustainability, and begin to shift and evolve your mindset to integrate minimalism into all of your outdoor pursuits. In episode 27 of the Outdoor Minimalist podcast, we explore the idea of using pee rags in the backcountry in a bit more detail. If you're a person with a vulva and you squat when you pee, a pee rag can be an excellent low-waste option. If you want more information about pee rags, menstrual cups, and more, go back and check out episode 17, where we explore all things menses and peeing in the woods. In that episode, we briefly cover some pee rag options, including the Kula Cloth. Because peeing outside is something so many of us do, I was excited to talk about this topic in more detail and to have a chance to sit down and chat with Anastasia Allison. Anastasia Allison is the founder of Kula Cloth, the first of its kind, an antimicrobial pee cloth for anybody who squats when they pee. Anastasia has been described as mysteriously complex, and when she isn't doing work for Kula or contemplating the vastness of the universe, she spends her time playing violin in the mountains, writing whimsical poetry, or dancing. And just as a reminder, before we get to the interview, the Outdoor Minimalist Patreon is still available. For more information about how to access bonus episodes and other patron-only content, head over to theoutdoorminimalist.com. Adventuring plans on your calendar? Remember to grab your Lava Linens travel towel on your way out the door. Founded by a mother-daughter team, Lava Linens crafts durable, luxurious travel towels as a more sustainable and better-performing alternative to microfiber and cotton towels. Powered by flax and hemp, they're designed to be by your side for years to come. Use the code Outdoor Minimalist for 15% off your next order. Thanks for joining me on the show today, Anastasia. I'm excited to learn more about the Kula Cloth and your journey in general. So before we get to all of that, can you tell me a little bit about your love of outdoor spaces and how that fits into your life?
Yeah, I have loved the outdoors since I was a little kid. It's always been the place where I have felt the most myself. I have always been the type of person that sort of felt like a round peg in a square hole, and the outdoors has a way of connecting people with themselves and with nature. So I think I just always gravitated towards being outside, having adventures, and being in a place where I felt like I could be me without judgment. And in my personal time now, I love to spend time backpacking. I love playing my music outside. I'm a violinist, and I've taken my violin and climbed mountains with it and played music in the backcountry. I love hiking. And for many years, I was sort of always doing these epic adventures. And I think now I'm at a point in my life where even just noticing the small things about the outdoors feels magical sometimes, noticing the sky or breathing fresh air. And I just try to hold on to that feeling of the wilderness, even if I'm not there. It is a really important part of how I'm able to run a business and then also just find balance in life in general.
Yeah, that's amazing. I like the integration into your daily life and just recognizing the little things, because I think that can be really hard to do sometimes.
It is. Yeah. And I think that there is this idea that being outside has to be these epic adventures all the time. I know that that was the case for me for a long time. And running a business has changed my focus a little bit because now I have employees that are sort of depending on me. And when you're, especially in the early stages of running a startup company, you can't just necessarily disappear for weeks on end into the backcountry. And so by all accounts, the last year has maybe been the least epic outdoor adventure year of my life. But what's really interesting is that it has been one of the happiest years. And I've been able to sort of hold on to that peace and ease that we feel very often when we're in the wilderness and find it no matter where I am. If I'm at home or if I'm at work, I can always come back to that feeling.
I love that. I feel like small business owners often struggle to find that balance. So it's encouraging to hear that you have kind of achieved that in some ways. And
it's possible.
It's possible. That's inspiring. So I am really interested in how Kula Cloth got started and the general origin story. In episode 17, we mentioned the Kula Cloth when we were talking about P-Reg. So we discussed it really briefly, but I think that it is a really unique and useful part of any backcountry kit. So I'm just interested how you decided to make this and how it even happened.
Yeah, I think it's a fun story. So I am a former park ranger, and back in around 2008, I started teaching backpacking for a nonprofit here in Washington State called Washington Outdoor Women. And I was always trying to teach my students best practices, focusing a lot on leave no trace and lightweight packing. I was on a personal backpacking trip in the Alpine Lakes Wilderness around the same time. It's really, really just spectacularly beautiful setting. And I came around a larch tree and I found this sort of large heap of toilet paper that had just been discarded there. And I sort of began to think, I wonder, like, are there alternatives to this? Are there leave no trace options that I could teach my students about? So I came home after that trip feeling sort of grossed out that people are just leaving toilet paper all over these really fragile alpine areas. And a quick Google search sort of landed me on an article that talked about using a bandana or a scrap of fabric as a pea cloth. And my first initial reaction to that was, that is disgusting. Why would you ever carry along a piece of fabric to wipe with? But because I was a backpacking instructor, I remember thinking to myself, okay, don't knock it until you try it. At least try it. So I bought this piece of microfiber fabric on Amazon, I think, and I snapped it to my backpack and I went out on a trip. And at the time, I had been either packing in and out a ton of toilet paper. Of course, I'd never discard it. But, if you go on a 6-day backpacking trip and you're trying to use toilet paper when you pee to stay dry, it's a lot of toilet paper that you're packing in, and now it's a lot of dirty toilet paper you're packing out. I had also tried drip drying on a trip, and I just ended up feeling really disgusting and nasty, and so I thought, well, that's not working. So now I had this blue scrap of fabric hanging off of my backpack, and I was shocked to discover that it was a total game changer. I could dry off, I could feel more comfortable, and I wasn't having to pack in and out a ton of toilet paper on trips. And so I started teaching all of my students about using a pea cloth when I taught my beginner backpacking class. I sort of became infamous for sort of talking about the benefits of using a pea cloth and how much of a game changer it was for everybody. And I was on a backpacking trip in 2016 with my husband. We did a route in Wyoming called the Wind River High Route. And it's this really epic 9-day trip. And I had this idea that I was going to take photographs of my blue scrap of fabric pea cloth in all of these beautiful locations at sunrise and sunset. And I was going to make a series of cards, greeting cards, with these photographs to give to a friend as a joke. So it was going to be this sort of beautiful series of pea cloth photos, and I was going to give it to a friend. And it was a evening at sunset. I had my pea cloth sort of perched dramatically on my trekking pole, and I'm setting up this unbelievably stunning shot with this backdrop. Of course, it's a pea cloth, so there's some irony there. But I set up this beautiful photo, and as I'm taking the photograph, it was like this idea sort of popped into my head from the ether. It just felt like it came from nowhere, and it was just, why isn't that a real piece of gear? Or I wonder if I could make something that looked cooler, because here I was taking a photograph of this sort of ugly scrap of fabric, and I wondered what sort of causes people to be squeamish about using a pea cloth is the idea that you're just sort of using some random piece of fabric. There's nothing intentional about it. It's not a real piece of gear. It's not attractive. And it's sort of like people put bandanas or scraps of fabric on the back of their backpack, and they don't necessarily tell people what it is. And I just thought to myself, I wonder if I could do that. And I didn't know how to sew. I didn't know how to start a company. I got home from that trip and did a little bit of research into textiles, and then immediately got scared about the money, the knowledge, like all the stuff that I didn't have to start the company.
Mm-hmm.
And so before I even got started, I stopped. That was it. I squashed the idea. Oh, and then of course it was like, well, why would anybody buy this? Well, nobody's going to buy it. They could just go buy a bandana. Like, this is the dumbest idea. And I talked myself out of it and sort of let it go. And fast forward about a year, I was coming home from a snowshoe trip with my mom and my husband, and I was driving. It was going up Stevens Pass, which is a mountainy pass here in Washington State. It was a perfectly clear, sunny day, and I hit a patch of ice that I didn't see, and our car spun into the path of an oncoming semi-truck. And I had this realization in that moment that, first off, I wasn't afraid. It was this very weird, surreal feeling of like, is this really happening to me? But there was no fear. And obviously there's a happy ending to that story. Here I am still today. But I began to look at my life and all the things that I wanted to do and kind of wondered for the first time, like, am I making up all these things that I'm afraid about in my head? Like, if I can look into the face of my own mortality and not feel fear, then why am I afraid to like make a pea cloth? And so I decided that I was just going to really go after all the stuff that I had wanted to do and had told myself that I wasn't good enough for. And I started taking little steps. I had no clue how to do pretty much anything, but I realized pretty quickly, you know what? I don't need to know how to do everything because there are other people out there who do know how to do things. And all I need to do is be resourceful and start looking for those people who are going to help me. And I learned how to sew a square. I started making little prototypes. And one thing led to another very quickly. Suddenly, I somehow was moving from my sort of really horribly sewn prototypes into professionally made products. And now Kula is sold all over the world. And it's just been such a gift to watch it make a difference in people's lives, both in the backcountry and beyond.
Yeah, what an origin story. That is a little bit back and forth, but I feel like that happens often to creators and entrepreneurs. And so I'm glad that you came to it. A little scary the way that you did come to it, but it is a positive outcome. Yeah,
yes.
Don't go try that.
I would not recommend that. Yeah, I would not. Yeah, please do not get into a like almost fatal car wreck in order to create a product. However, I do believe that there is some aspect of like awakening to yourself that is involved with the creation of anything, because you really have to like detach from all of the things you've told yourself for so long that have ultimately been protecting you, right? Like limiting beliefs are there because we think that they're keeping us safe, when in reality, they're often keeping us trapped. And you have to disidentify with those in order to move forward. And that can be scary to let them go and like walk out into the unknown and just hope it works out. But I really hope that Kula can be sort of proof and give people hope that like, hey, if Anastasia, who literally knew nothing about anything can do this, then anybody else can too.
So I am curious because I feel like the mission of Kula Cloth is relatively layered just from hearing you talk about the origins and how you got to this place. But before that, I want to know, what does the name mean?
Yeah, the name Kula means community. And I wanted the piece of gear. I looked at other sort of hygiene-ish products that were in the marketplace when I was in the process of naming Kula, and I noticed a trend that there was always this sort of like jokey aspect to it, right? Like it sort of had a cutesy, funny sounding name, and I didn't want people to think of Kula and immediately think of it's a joke or urine. And what's really interesting is that when people talk about Kula and they think about it, urine, it's like the last thing that pops into their mind. It's sort of like, oh yeah, it happens to be a pea cloth, but there's all this other stuff too. And I really wanted people to, when they saw somebody else with a Kula cloth on the trail, I wanted it to be an instant connection that they had with people. And to me, that is the most important thing, is like creating real community, real connection, and fostering an environment where people can connect more deeply with themselves and others, and then cultivate sort of an environment of focusing on the good in the world. And that seems awfully deep coming from a pea cloth, but I think that we're each given a chance to like ask ourselves, what is the true purpose of what I want to do in this world? And making money and shipping products out there is great on the surface level, but that was never really the driving force for me. And that remains true today. The Kula is a vehicle for something deeper than that. And I think a lot of people show up to Kula thinking that they're only going to be getting a pea cloth, and they end up being a little bit surprised.
So do you feel that Kula community is really the underlying like mission and vision of the company, or are there other aspects as well?
Yeah, I think that is the underlying vision, right? It's using this product. Like the product is the way that we connect with people. But then the underlying purpose of what we're doing is bringing some sort of sense of presence and beingness into other people's lives. As corny as it sounds, bringing love into people's lives, even if it's just in a small way. And so everything that we do, from, postcards that we send out to little poems that we write on our website, to having a little peace portal on our website where people can listen to a meditation, or hosting dance experiments where people can dance with me for a month. Like all of those things are meant to ultimately bring some sense of presence and being into people's lives. And I think that to me is the ultimate purpose. I look around me often at the world that can be somewhat chaotic and frustrating place. And I understand on some level that chaos and that frustration is a symptom of a disconnect within each of us, or within the population as a whole. And I think healing that disconnect, like helping people come back to themselves and then taking action from a place of presence in the world. I think that, like, if I can send people out into the world with that type of an energy, if that, like, what is the ripple effect of that on the planet? That really excites me, because, if you're just trying to fix the problem, like, and let's just say that you think that the problem is toilet paper on the ground, right? Like that's a surface level problem. That's a symptom of a disconnect between somebody who is really in touch with themselves, who's really in touch with nature, who is open to new experiences and like really just truly seeking some meaningful connection, right? Like that person is going to be much less likely to leave a heap of toilet paper on the ground. They're also much more likely to have access to information about Leave No Trace. And so it's, I think, more to me about helping people connect with themselves, and then from that place, like knowing that their actions are going to ripple out into good actions as they move about the world.
Yeah, sometimes it does feel like a lot of the issues that come up really frequently in the outdoor industry are symptomatic, like you're saying. So I really love that representation and bringing it back to your self-awareness and having a greater understanding of how you impact everything around you.
Yeah, yeah. It's like we've lost a sense of like feeling the sort of aliveness of everything around us. And when you lose that sense of wonder because you're so busy like naming things and focused on, okay, I need, this gear to get out. Most people are so in their heads all the time that they never really have the chance to go out there and like feel that sense of awe that comes from just looking and observing things. And I think that is something that needs to come back into our lives more, because that is the type of feeling that inspires us to actions that will really cultivate positive change in all areas of life.
Yeah, something that I'm thinking back to episode 17, the guest in that episode, she mentioned the Kula Cloth and kind of what it was representing, because all of the designs are really beautiful, and that reclaiming of something, I don't want to say something like dirty, because I don't mind using like a bandana or something to pee outside, but kind of reframing and reclaiming that conversation and representation of one tiny aspect outdoors, and how that can kind of reframe your mindset surrounding the activity as well.
Yes, totally. And intentionally, very intentionally, kulas are beautiful works of art because it is sort of, I guess, highlighting the sacredness of our bodies and the idea that hygiene and talking about things like that is not something that we need to be ashamed of. And that was one of the things that I hoped, and sort of goes back to the idea of Kula being a community, is that I wanted the Kula to be something beautiful on somebody's backpack so that people would be more likely to have those conversations. When I first started backpacking, I did not know how to pee or poop in the wilderness. And honestly, my first backpacking trip ever was led by a man, and I was too afraid to ask him. And I ended up stealing toilet paper from somebody, and the whole experience was a little bit shameful for me. And so Kula is very, very intentionally designed in such a way that the art is something that could start a conversation on the trail and sort of give people permission that they don't have to hide anything about their hygiene or be ashamed of it.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing your first experience about peeing outside, because I do want to talk a little bit about the logistics of that and kind of like best practices.
Yeah.
I feel like we could dive a little bit into some of the leave no trace guidelines and just any general advice you would have for peeing outside. I know a lot of listeners are experienced backpackers and stuff like that, but I also know that there are several listeners that would kind of be in those beginning stages, which is great. And I would just love to represent a little bit of a better intro or helping people feel more comfortable in those situations.
First off, I would say wherever you are with your backpacking or hiking knowledge, that's great, because we all started out somewhere. So if you feel a little hesitant about how to pee outside, that's also totally normal. And I've talked to a lot of people. You can imagine I talk to people about peeing pretty quickly when I meet them. And there's just such a wide range of knowledge that's out there. But in general, leave no trace principles suggest that you pee away from water sources, at least 200 feet away from natural water sources. The only exception to that rule would be in some areas where you are perhaps going on a river float trip, like in areas where there's high volumes of moving water. A lot of those places, like the Grand Canyon, for instance, they will actually tell you to pee in the water because the outlying areas are more fragile than the river itself. But in general, if you're in a forested or alpine area, you want to pee 200 feet away from water sources. If at all possible, it's helpful to pee on rocks or away from vegetation because animals sometimes are attracted to the salt in our urine and it can cause a high impact on the vegetation. I've peed on the grass before and come out in the morning only to find a deer sort of frantically digging at a spot where I had peed because they're going after the salt. So if I'm peeing in the backcountry, typically I will stop to pee and take my Kula or a pee cloth or toilet paper, whatever it is that you are using, and wipe off. If I'm using the Kula, I don't wipe like with normal toilet paper, like front to back. I'm mostly just sort of holding it in place or patting dry so that it can absorb any excess moisture. And then I'm simply pulling my underwear back up, snapping my Kula back to my backpack or my pee cloth, and going about my day. If you are somebody who perhaps you're wearing a rock climbing harness or you're on a glacier, there are personal urinary devices, something like a pee style, for instance, that gives you the option to pee standing up and pee without pulling your pants down. There's also a company called She Fly that makes a specific pair of pants that actually has a zipper that kind of unzips from front to back, and it allows you to squat down and sort of pull your underwear to the side, and you can actually pee without having to remove your pants completely. Also really helpful, especially if you're, on a busy trail. You can literally just squat off to the side and nobody can see anything. But that's pretty much it for peeing. It can be really, really simple to do. And I encourage people, I've talked to people before who have told me that they have specifically dehydrated themselves when they're out hiking because they didn't know how to handle peeing in the backcountry. And I would definitely recommend keeping yourself nice and hydrated and just experimenting with it so that you can get comfortable with it. If you do decide to use something like a pee funnel, like a pee style, I would definitely recommend practicing with that first. I would not recommend doing that your first time at 13,000 feet on the side of a volcano. Just saying that for a friend. Yeah, that was the first time I decided to use a pee funnel was while climbing Mount Rainier, and it did not go well for me. So I would definitely recommend practicing in the shower first. I also usually carry with me when I'm sort of out in the backcountry or even on a day hike, I carry a toilet paper kit. So I use my Kula specifically for peeing, but in the event that I had to do something other than peeing, like poop, or if I'm having my period, I'll often carry a bag that has extra toilet paper in it, a small bag with some wet wipes in it, and then an empty Ziploc bag that I can use to pack out trash. So the important thing is that a lot of toilet paper and wet wipes out there, they will say things like biodegradable on the package, and biodegradable would be under the absolute ideal conditions. And most of the wild places that we love to explore, like deserts or alpine areas or even forests, it could take months or years for these quote unquote biodegradable wipes to actually disappear. So in general, I make a personal rule to just pack everything out with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because even if you're burying them, a lot of them won't actually biodegrade. Some of the wipes contain plastic materials. So
exactly.
Yeah, just pack it out if you bring it in.
Yes.
That is a great message. A lot of great insights in there too, because I didn't know that about the vegetation and the animals being interested in the salt. That's really interesting.
Yeah, goats love it. We have a lot of mountain goats here in Washington State, and the goats will literally sort of chase you around as you're peeing because they want to lick up the salt. And so there are areas out there that have really high goat populations, and you really have to be careful about just peeing on granite slabs so that the goats are not sort of decimating the local flora.
That is great to know.
Yeah.
You already mentioned a little bit about how to use the Kula Cloth specifically, just kind of holding it in place like that. But I am wondering wondering, what are the main differences if someone already uses a P-rag like a bandana? What are the main differences between a Kula cloth and a bandana?
Yeah, so the fabric that we use for the Kula Cloth is specifically designed for hygiene. That is the purpose of the fabric. It is actually two different fabrics that are bonded together using heat. The outside fabric, which has usually beautiful art on it, is made from a waterproof fabric so that when you are using the antimicrobial absorbent side, you aren't going to get your hands dirty. And so that would be a significant difference between a bandana and a Kula cloth, is that the Kula cloth has a very specifically designated use side, whereas a bandana, when you're just attaching it to your backpack, it's hard to know where you've used it. And then also when you are using it to wipe, urine can easily soak through, get on your hands. And hygiene, I'm not personally grossed out by the idea of getting urine on my hands. However, after a 5-day backpacking trip where your hands are just disgusting, it's really important to actually keep your hands clean over, even just a day trip. So the Kula makes it a lot easier to know, okay, which side am I using? Which side am I touching? The Kula snaps to your backpack, which makes it easy to hold. You don't have to tie it on there. And then after you've used it, you can actually snap it closed. And so that is going to keep the P side from touching your backpack or, touching anything else. It also keeps it clean so that if you set your backpack down on the ground, your P cloth is not rolling around in the dirt and then getting touched onto a sensitive part of your body. The other thing that I added onto the Kula cloth, and this was just something that I felt was important, is that I usually found that I would rinse my pea cloth off before going to bed at night. And invariably, I would wake up at 2:30 in the morning in my tent needing to pee. I'd leave the tent and I would have hung my little pea cloth up in a tree somewhere and I could never find it. I'm like stumbling around with my headlamp on at 2:30 in the morning. And so we added some really high-tech retro reflective thread to the edge of the Kula so that at night, if you do hang the Kula out to dry after washing it, you can wake up at night and the Kula will sort of glow in the dark a little bit once your headlamp hits it. And so you can always find it in the middle of the night. So I feel like the Kula just feels very, very intentional. Like, that it is for peeing. People are less likely to grab it and ask what it is, although that does happen sometimes.
So I appreciate the intentionality. I feel like it does just in general make it easier and more hygienic to use. And because hygiene is such an integral part of the Kula cloth, I am also wondering, you kind of mentioned that you don't use it on your period. So is it something that you would not recommend to use if you're experiencing your menstrual cycle?
Actually, I use my Kula when I am having my period.
Oh, okay.
So when I'm having my period and I'm out in the backcountry, I typically use a menstrual cup. So I will use a pixie cup or a diva cup to sort of catch menstrual blood. And then I dump that out in the evenings and in the mornings as well. If you are a person who uses tampons or pads, you can still absolutely use your Kula. The nice thing about the Kula is that the absorbent side of the Kula is black in color. So if you get any menstrual blood onto it, it's not going to show or have like really obvious stains. So you can definitely use it on your period. I would just recommend rinsing it out in the evening. I've actually even had people who have gotten a surprise period on a backpacking trip and they've used a Kula as a pad.
Oh.
So you could definitely use it while you're having your period. The Kula is infused with silver ions. So that's sort of the antimicrobial aspect of the product. And the silver ions prevent bacteria, excessive amounts of bacteria from like growing on the Kula. And so it does keep it clean. and more hygienic when you're using it against your body.
Yeah, I was wondering how exactly that works because you mentioned rinsing it out and stuff, but I was interested in how exactly it stays sanitary to be used.
Yeah. And, what's interesting is when we talk about silver, the silver really isn't there for the urine because typically just using it for hygiene is relatively clean.
Mhm.
Now, once urine leaves your body, it's no longer sterile. And you're obviously, when you're backpacking, you are absolutely not in a sterile environment. So I definitely cannot say like, oh, your Kula Cloth is going to be perfectly sterile because nothing out in the backcountry is going to be perfectly sterile. However, silver ions are there to prevent bacteria growth. And when I was choosing sort of a silver application for Kula, I did a lot of research, talked to people who were actually scientists who knew what they were talking about because I'm not an expert in that field, and learned that there's different types of silver applications that can be used with fabric. There's ions and then there's nanoparticles. The nanoparticles tend to be more harmful to wastewater systems because remember, there's good bacteria out there too. And so you don't want to ever have a product that is putting something negative into the environment. And this specifically is talking about like if you are washing your Kula Cloth in your washing machine. Are those silver nanoparticles going into your wastewater system? And are they going to be more likely to actually kill some of the good bacteria that's in there? And the ions, which is what we use, those actually, if any of them do come off of the fabric, they will simply turn inert. So they cause no damage to wastewater systems. And the treatment on the fabric itself will generally outlive the length of the Kula Cloth. So you can use a Kula Cloth for its entire life. I have Kulas that I've been using for 3 years. And now have I lab tested them for, how much silver ions are still left? No, but I also don't notice a ton of odor from them. And the efficacy of the product does not seem to be any different than when I first got it. So Kulas are odor resistant, not odor proof. And I will say that odors from urine are a personal thing that depends a lot on your individual body chemistry, hydration levels, what you've eaten, a whole bunch of different things. But in general, like when you're using a pea cloth, specifically one that's been treated with silver ions, you are likely to not experience any severe odors from using that product.
That's good to know. I was wondering about the particles in the water when you're washing them and stuff, so I'm really glad that you brought that up. So when you are out, say you're out for a longer period of time, I'm guessing if you're only out for a night or something, you're not really going to be washing your Kula in the backcountry. So do you just recommend rinsing that out with some water? Do you also use soap? And then if you're in a sunny area, I suppose the sun can kind of just hit it on your backpack and sanitize it in some ways that way as well.
Exactly. So you're 100% correct. So if I'm out on a day hike or just an overnight, chances are I'm not going to wash it. If I'm out for multiple days, I'll definitely wash the product. And typically what I do is I take my water bottle and I usually bring along about a 1/2 ounce container of Bronner's peppermint soap. That one seems to work really, really well. And again, I'm washing the Kula away from natural water sources. So I'm not rinsing the Kula out in a stream or a mountain lake. I'm taking my water bottle, I'm walking 200 feet away from natural water sources, and I'm pouring some water on the Kula. I'm adding a couple drops of soap. I'm agitating the product with my hand to get it clean, and then I'm rinsing it. And then I usually just hang it up to dry. When you come home from a trip, you can put the Kula in your standard washer dryer. I recommend making sure that the snap is closed so that it doesn't get snagged in the agitator. And I also recommend putting it in something like a delicates bag if you have a bunch of items in your laundry with Velcro, just so that the thread doesn't get snagged. But my preference typically is honestly just to wash it out in my sink. It takes like 2 seconds. It's really gentle. I'm not using any detergents on the Kula. I just usually use Bronner's peppermint soap, rinse it out, hang it up, and that's it.
Awesome. Yeah, that seems like pretty easy upkeep to me.
I've been using the same ones for like 3 years. And I mean, I have access to probably more Kulas than any human should ever, ever have access to. And like, I've just never needed a new one. And I'm so disappointed because we have so many beautiful new prints and I can never justify, like, I don't need a new one. And of course, that's the idea, right? It's like, we're reducing the amount of toilet paper. When COVID first happened and there was that sort of toilet paper rush, I had so many people, literally thousands of people, switch to using Kula Cloth at home. And they realized like, oh my gosh, I'm going through so much less toilet paper. And so now, in addition to people who use Kula outside, I also have a whole group of people that are using Kula in RVs or on boats or at home. And, you know, there's so many different uses for it. And it really does make peeing that much less impactful, I suppose.
Yeah, because toilet paper does have a really big impact in and out of the backcountry. So it is interesting. I kind of forgot about that toilet paper rush, but I could see how having a Kula in those moments would have been very helpful.
Oh, yeah. You know, I have never seen so many Kula sales so quickly in my life. And we had a whole bunch of like seconds Kulas as well. And we ended up giving hundreds and hundreds of them away during the start of the pandemic. And it was really neat to see that. And so many people have continued to use their Kulas at home. And that's really refreshing to hear.
Yeah, that's great to hear how that sometimes something negative comes with a positive outcome, I guess. Little positive outcomes.
Yes, I agree.
So I also follow Kula Cloth on social media, and I love a lot of your content, but it is also pretty clear that you're more than just a P-Reg company, which I hope people have gathered from what you have already explained. But what are some of your other efforts regarding stewardship and holistic health?
Yeah, so we also have, in addition to just the product itself, we have a sort of virtual and in-person, I'll call it a school, called the Kula Academy, which is a combination of online classes and in-person meetups that host events anywhere from, right now I'm dancing, literally dancing with a group of people for 1 month, to learning how to wood burn, to watercolor classes, to outdoor skills and knowledge. We have classes on preventing injury in the backcountry. I mean, the list of classes and experiences that we have sort of goes on. And I would say that there's not really an overarching theme on the surface of what the classes are because it's so varied. You know, we have online Pictionary coming up in a couple months, but I think that there is this sort of underlying purpose of really fostering genuine connection with others and truly seeing people and appreciating them for who they are and where they are in their life, and focusing on what we want to create rather than looking out at the world and saying, oh, this is terrible, I'm just going to be upset about it. I want to look out at the world and say, no, there's so much good out here. And the more that I focus on that, the more that I will be led to create more of that. And the more that that is going to ripple out into the world. And I've experienced this over the last 3 weeks of dancing with the same group of people, that folks are experiencing something that they never thought possible. We get emails all the time from people who say, I thought all I was doing was buying a pea cloth, and now I'm learning how to watercolor, or now I'm learning how to wood burn, or now I've been dancing for 21 days in a row, and my life is more enriched because of this. And so I definitely want it to be more than a pea cloth. We also, and when I say we, I mean my sister, Mare, who sort of helps me out with social media, we also want to make people laugh and connect them over things that are funny. And we love to do things that bring people together over humor and really focus on that a lot as well. Because it can be pretty easy to go out into the world and look at the news for 5 seconds. And you forget what a miracle of a planet we live on. And I feel like if we can bring a little bit of that sense of life as a miracle back into somebody's lives, even if it's just for a second, I think we're doing something right.
I love that. It's very clear through your entire messaging, whether it's the learning platform and also the Kula Cloth itself, that there is a lot of intentionality and desire to add goodness to community, which I really love. And if people want to learn more about the Kula Cloth, follow along with the journey, and access any of the information that you've already shared, what are the best places to find you?
Yeah, so our website is just kulacloth.com, Kula, and then the word cloth. So kulacloth.com is our website. And then our Instagram handle is exactly the same. It's just at Kula Cloth. And those are the 2 best ways to get in touch with us. And we'd love to hear from anybody. We answer every message that comes in. So if anybody has any questions, don't hesitate to reach out.
Awesome. And I'll share all those links in the episode notes. So if you are driving or something and want to look at them later, you can check them out there. And with that, Anastasia, thank you so much for being on the show. I feel really jazzed about the rest of the week just from hearing you talk.
I'm so glad. My sister jokes with me. She's like, Anastasia, you can start out a poem talking about peeing and pooping in the woods, and somehow by the end of the poem, you've tapped into like the secrets of the universe. And I'm like, that's just me. I love being able to combine those things together. And so if I can leave people feeling how special they truly are, then I feel like I'm doing my job right too.
It's like your superpower.
It's my superpower.
Thanks for listening. And if you like what you hear, let me know. Leave a review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. New content has begun to appear on the Outdoor Minimalist Patreon. Head over to theoutdoorminimalist.com for more information about our listener support and patron exclusives. You can still find me on Instagram at outdoor.minimalist.book. Follow there for daily updates, other educational resources, and to help build an outdoor community with a shared goal to create a better outdoor space as we recreate.